I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. Hi guys, sorry that for the late start today. I ran intervals this afternoon, so if I'd come on live any earlier, I would have spoken like this for the entire live, and you probably wouldn't have enjoyed that. So the hoarseness has gone away a little bit. I'm still a little bit hoarse. Really hard intervals, heart rate up to almost 170. Still kind of exhausted. Yeah, just had a relaxing bath, and I'm almost human again after being almost not alive. But anyway, so we are going to look at Karl Stanley. We're going to go to his testimony right now. Welcome to day 6 of the U.S. Coast Guard hearings. Good to see you guys here. South to West, Eddie Feltman, Cat and Canary, Erin, good to see you all. Paul St. Laurent. Shall we begin? Let's begin.
A false statement given to an agency of the United States is punishable by fine and/or imprisonment under 18 USC 1001.
Billy, yeah.
Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, Mr. Stanley. Thank you for being here today. When you speak to the microphone, if you could just energize your button.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Keith Fawcett will have the first round of questioning for you, sir. And if you ever need to take a break, just let us know. We'll have a recess.
Thank you.
Mr. Stanley, thank you for being here. You've got the exhibits that we intend to use in front of you, and there's a laser pointer in case you want to use it up on the screen to highlight anything. And then if there's a particular page that you want to go to in one of your answers while we're referencing an exhibit, just ask the recorder to advance the page.
Okay.
You've been here for a majority of this testimony at this board. So when I ask a question, all of my questions will be framed of what you knew leading up to the events that transpired on the accident day, June 18th, 2023, unless I specifically ask you otherwise.
Okay.
And then avoid acronyms. And if you accidentally use one, please explain what that is. So we're going to cover 2 topic areas. The first is...
Can you guys let me know which audio is better, that one or this one?
Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth?
Seems like they're about the same. Okay.
Your experience and work history related to submersible operations, the background and history with your submersible operation, the role of classification societies in what I will call tourist submersibles or submersibles that engage in oceanographic research but may carry passengers. And then the oversight, regulatory oversight for submersibles that you might be aware of. Mm-hmm. The second topic area, we will talk about your interaction with Mr. Stockton Rush and personnel that may work for OceanGate. So that'll be the second area. So if you would, just take your time and explain your background and training that relate to submersible operations.
Okay, so you're about to find out who he is. His name's Karl Stanley, but let him speak for himself. Here we go.
So the way that I got into this whole line of work is I read a book when I was 9 years old, and
Well, we're going that far back.
it was a short story written by a veteran for his own children that turned into a little series of books. And from the 50s, I was just recently able to, a friend tracked it down for me. And at that age, when you say you want to do something like that, adults are encouraging, and I kind of took them seriously / was gullible enough and started researching how to make a submersible and going to the library. I traveled when I was old enough. I think at the age of 14, I took the train into New York, saw submarines on display at international underwater contractors, told them what I wanted to do. They lent me tools, allowed me to dissect parts, and I was taking notes. When I saw the bathysphere at Coney Island, I remember I wasn't old enough to drive. I had to take my bicycle, and I went to my local American Bureau of Shipping office and got a copy of the rule book and started looking through that. And from saving money mostly of scooping ice cream and working at a bagel shop, when I was 15, I had the first piece of steel delivered to my parents' backyard in New Jersey and hired a welder for one day to give me professional demonstration. But I had already done some studying on how to weld and then started at it. And by the time the same week I graduated college was the same week that submarine named Seabug made its maiden voyage. And this sub had carried myself and one passenger to a max of 725 feet, but the majority of the dives that I did with it were to 500 feet. I started very methodically diving. The first dive that it did was in a creek near my campus, Eckerd College, where the XR, which stands for Eckerd College Search and Rescue Team, was standing by with scuba divers when I did the first dive in the creek to maybe 10 feet. And then I was using it on the Gulf side of Florida, so you can't get very deep there. The deepest I ever got was 90 feet by Fort DeSoto, which was actually, looking back, a terrible choice. It was high currents and poor visibility in a shipping lane, but allowed me to test it to 90 feet. That was my first interaction with the marine authorities, coincidentally. So I was already aware that of the regulations. I mean, we're going back to the early 90s or mid 90s now, but I specifically kept that vehicle under 12 feet, and I didn't put motors on it until I took it out of the country. And so I registered it, but in terms of regulation, I was trying to keep it in the same category as a canoe or a kayak. And that's actually how the authorities treated it when I was in Florida. I did 49 dives with it in the state of Florida. I took it to the other side of the state and was using it.
So yeah, you have him speaking frankly about trying to, I don't know if manipulate is the right word, but trying to frame the type of craft he was in so that he could use it the way he wanted to, without too much restrictions. And you can only imagine that it was so much more of that going on with OceanGate, right? Have a look at his water bottle. It kind of looks like the Titan Submersible end on end. It's sort of gray with a sort of knobbly end as well. Kind of something that I noticed anyway.
There's a little stretch between West Palm to Fort Lauderdale area that I did. Most of the dives there started at 200 feet, 400 feet, got to 600 feet, was diving.
Yeah, David says no legit qualifications. I think that's a fair statement. I think at the same time, it's also fair to say, some people are self-made men, and you might scoff at that. I think qualifications do mean something, but they also don't mean everything. But in terms of this individual, he didn't study to be an engineer. A lot of this seems to have been based, a lot of his work seems to have been based on inspiration and his own research. You kind of get the idea that that it's kind of rags to riches, that he didn't really have much to work with to begin with. And anyway, let's listen to the rest.
Diving. And so the way I was doing it, I had to get miles and miles offshore. I would go to boat clubs and dive clubs, and I would give an actual slideshow with slides and give a little spiel of, if you have a boat and you're willing to tow me miles offshore, I'll take you down in my sub. And so no money was changing hands. If the authorities questioned us, which they did quite often, we could honestly say, like, who's chartering who here? We both showed up with our boats and we're having recreational activity.
Check, he's making a note there, like the school principal.
And they, I remember one time, and this is pre 9/11, but they were they wanted to stop me from diving, and they had, I want to say, Coast Guard, sheriff, and some other kind of patrol, 3 different boats, guns drawn, telling me I can't get on the sub. And it was about 2 hours that they had us detained before they said, yeah, we've been patched through the Coast Guard headquarters, and this is basically under 12 feet and doesn't have a motor, and go ahead. So at that point, so I also, it never started out as a business. It started, as an idea I had in my head when I was 9 years old. And there were no submersible.
Sorry, I think that's a big difference between him and Stockton. Was I kind of got the idea that Stockton started this off with Guillermo Sondheim as a business. It was as a business idea, whereas this dude is passionate about it. It's something that he loves doing, right? Definitely get the feeling that there's more love with him for what he was doing and less of an interest in business than Stockton, right?
Charter operations in the world at that time. So I didn't even have a model to look at in terms of knowing where it was going to lead. And when I graduated, I had the goal of, I had some money saved from a business, and I had the goal of diving it as much as I could for that summer. And if I couldn't figure out a way to make a go of it and have it be generating income, I was basically going to throw in the towel and say, well, I tried for a summer and that was that. But I had it on display at a dive show called Ocean Fest. And it was there that I met a man with a resort in Roatan, which is the island where I've lived for the last 26 years. And that's how I ended up getting into the tourist submarine business. But even when I went down to Roatan, I didn't really, I was only charging at first $125 a person, and I could only carry one person at a time. And it was.
So someone asked earlier, who is he? And he's kind of answered it. He's a tourist submarine operator, right? Karl Stanley. And this is the way I would say to do it in a reasonable way. The whole sort of put tourists in submersibles. This is the way that I guess is safe compared to Stockton's way, which is going into extreme environments and not certifying. Let's hear whether he says his craft was certified. Let's listen to that part.
It was just barely maintaining. It wasn't a very, it wasn't going to provide a livelihood, but it was an exciting, interesting thing to do at the time. And then I left Roatan after 2 years of doing that and completing more than 400 dives. to go into a charter for a Canadian company that was the first one to get permission from the Cuban government to look for Spanish galleons in front of Havana. And because they were a Canadian company, they had a better relationship with the Cuban government. They hired me, and it was supposed to be for 2 months, but it ended up being for 6 months. And with that sub, I surveyed the entire area in front of Havana from 130 feet to 500 feet, 2 miles to either side on 20-foot depth transects. And after that job was done, they dropped me back in the Florida Keys, and I had a decision to make. And I decided maybe I should build a bigger sub and go back to Roatan and make better business out of this. And in the effort of doing that, I drove cross country. I had never been to the West Coast before, and there's a lot of submersible expertise on the West Coast. I met with Graham Hawkes. I met with Will Cohen. I met with Doug Privet. I met with this guy, Siverts. I forget his first name, but he had a sub that was uncertified that he was doing outfall inspection for LA County for many years with, called Snooper. Saw his operation, and I stopped and saw friends, and I made a big trip out of it. And in between New Orleans and New Mexico, I had nowhere really to stop. And somebody that I had had a brief encounter with on my dock years earlier, and I had mentioned that I had the idea of building another submarine one day, lived in Oklahoma. And he had told me, well, if you ever think you're really going to build another sub, stop by. I have a machine shop and I might help you out. And I was like, so passing between that big distance, I was like, well, I'll check this guy out. And literally showed up unannounced in Idabel, Oklahoma, looked up Buck Hill, and turns out he's the second or third largest employer in the entire county. Has a very impressive facility where he makes solid rubber tires that ship around the world, some of which maybe only one would fit on the back of an 18-wheeler. And he makes them from scratch. He brings in raw, unvulcanized rubber and sheets of steel and turns out a finished product that's in demand around the world. And so he obviously had a lot of machining capabilities and contacts in the town. The first day I was there, he took me to go meet the mayor. The mayor said, this is an exciting project. What can we do to help? He took me to go meet a friend that had an airport hangar that wasn't being used, agreed to rent it to me for $100 a day. The cost of living was extremely low. There was a lake the next town over that was 200 feet deep where I could do my testing. And I was like, well,
I must say, I feel a bit different to some of you in the comments. I've got quite a lot of respect for him. In a way, I've had a similar experience. I built myself up, and you might say, well, into what? But in terms of, I didn't go to journalism school, and I didn't go to, you know what I mean? And he didn't study engineering, but he taught himself, and he was a self-starter. I've got respect for that. I've also got respect for the fact that he had the common sense to not do what Stockton Rush did. He wasn't overly ambitious. He knew how to be measured about it. So there's some people in the comments that seem to be ridiculing him, but I actually think it's quite special that somebody has a passion in an area that's not very well known, and that they don't let that stop them. And they're curious, and they reach out to other people, and they form relationships, and they develop expertise without saying, well, I need to go and study something. They basically are hands-on, and they try and make it work, and they try and make it go over it, and it seems like he has. So I've got respect for that, I must say.
Oh, this is the perfect spot. This is where I'm going to build my sub if I decide to do that. And I went to the West Coast, met with all those people, and so my front passenger sphere is upcycled from the same Perry submersible that is was built 1 year before I was born, the PC 1503, which is basically Antipodes and Idabel they're kind of sisters. They came from parts from the same original vessel. And I don't remember exactly how Stockton and I met, but I'm sure that was critical to how we ended up, starting to talk and like that. So basically, I holed up in this airport hangar in Oklahoma for a year and a half, literally rolled out of bed in the morning and got to work on this sub. Didn't really have any distractions. I only left the state, I think, once in the year and a half. And after a couple of test dives in the lake, shipped it down to Roatan and have been, that was 21 years ago. Since then, I've done in this vehicle over 1,840 dives.
Nice.
So I'm going to ask the recorder to pull up Coast Guard Exhibit 084 TAC 1, which is a series of images and specifications for the vessels that you have been involved with, sir. And I just want to look at the top image on the first page, and I believe that's the first vessel that you were involved with.
Yeah, so the first one there is Seabug, and that stands for Controlled by Buoyancy Underwater Glider. And part of my design.
It kind of looks like something out of a James Bond movie, an old James Bond movie, but kind of looks like, looks pretty cool, right?
Criteria were keeping it as lightweight as possible. So I kept track of every dollar that I spent on that sub. I had that thing operational for right at $20,000, which with inflation, probably you're talking double or triple at least now. But right off the bat, when I got the ABS book, so I mean, I did my due diligence and looked at the rules and looked at all the other vehicles and studied how to do it properly from a mechanical standpoint, obviously. Certification was not an option for me straight off the bat for two main reasons. One, this vehicle is incredibly small. It only displaces 2,300 pounds, which is similar to displacement of one-person articulated diving suits. The hatch was only 18 inches in diameter, and the main body is 24 inches in diameter. There's an ABS rule that your hatch has to have 3 feet of freeboard.
Can I ask you to use the laser pointer to, you're talking about different components, so maybe over on this screen here.
So that's the hatch, and these are the wings, and the passenger would get it, only the middle tower opened, and the passenger would get in first, lie down, get into the back, and then I would get in and seal the hatch. And that accomplished a couple things. One, you had one less sealing surface to worry about, and you didn't have to worry about your passengers if they sealed the hatch or not. And two, it kept the hatch opening in the center of the entire vehicle, and the wings actually made it very stable, and I was able.
So can you see there's kind of a tube over here, right? Can you see, well, let's do it like that. There's kind of a central cylinder over here, and then a kind of a piece sticking out over there. And then it sort of has these wings on either side. different concept to Titan, but of course it doesn't dive nearly as deep. Not meant to.
To safely get people in and out of there in even 6-foot seas.
Ballast is important to submersible operations. Can you use the pointer and point to where the ballast systems are?
So this vehicle had 6 ballast tanks. Each one of these covers is one. And you were able to control your pitch, roll, and overall buoyancy all independently using different valves inside. And that's where you got the gliding. And I would note that this is also the world's first gliding submersible ever made. And both Graham Hawkes and Phil Newton, after this, had gliding submersibles. And even DARPA now recently came out with a large manta ray looking gliding unmanned vehicle.
And later on, we'll talk about Mr. Hawks, but you know his professional affiliation, what company?
I know that he was originally supposed to be a third partner, and him and Stockton basically had a falling out over how much he was going to get paid. But he unquestionably has the most experience making composite pressure vessels for human occupancy, and that was obviously a huge error in judgment.
Composite vessels for human occupancy, are you talking about carbon fiber and other non-traditional construction materials such as titanium and steel?
Composite would refer, glass reinforced fiber, fiberglass, carbon fiber. As we've heard, there were diving suits that had fiberglass components, and Roy Thomas spoke about vehicles that have been classified in other countries that have had composite construction for components.
And then you mentioned the articulated diving suit, one-person diving suit. Are you talking about where the wearer gets into a large structure that has joints where they can move? It's not a traditional wetsuit or anything like that, is it?
Yeah, they're one atmosphere. They're essentially one-person submersibles with that you almost wear. But from a design perspective, they basically are submersibles.
So if you'll scroll down, Lieutenant Steele.
I just want to respond to Robbie Robbins' comment there. First of all, I don't really know the answer. I'm assuming it's not certified, but I'd say he's in the Honduras because you don't need certification there. That's why it's not in the USA. I would guess that it's not certified because it's too expensive to certify. That's my guess. Let's see what. Has anyone listened to all the testimony where that was answered? Right? Is it certified? I don't think it is. That's why it's in the Honduras. That's why it's in that particular territory.
In the bottom, we see another submersible. What are we looking at here?
This is my the vehicle I operate now.
Kind of looks like an octopus, right? And I quite appreciate the creative flair that he's got. I mean, if you think about Titan, I thought Titan was quite ugly. I didn't think it had a sort of minimalist charm about it at all. I thought it was like clunky and ugly looking. And this has got its own little flair. Even the Deep Sea Challenger, James Cameron's ship, just has a great look about it. There's something cheap about the Titan as far as I'm concerned. It looks kind of not, as far as I'm concerned, particularly impressive.
She's named Idabel after the town in Oklahoma, and it has the large forward sphere is the one that came out of the Pisces sub, which held the compressed gas for the divers to lock out on. And it's made out of HY100, which is one of the approved steels. Actually, the U.S. Navy was making their own submarines out of that steel. developed that steel for U.S. Navy submarines. And the two spheres in the back are 516 grade 70, which is your most common pressure vessel steel, and they're nowhere near.
So I don't know about you guys, but when I look at that, I kind of get a sense of fun and exploring not the deep sea, but the shallow sea. And you almost get the idea that there would be kids running around inside, running from one window to the other, and that you'd see jellyfish and sharks and, manta rays and whatnot. And that kind of craft I wouldn't mind getting into. I think you in like a tropical environment. It doesn't go very deep, and it's just part of the fun. And I mean, the design, it kind of looks like an octopus, doesn't it? I wouldn't mind getting into that. I have been in a glass bottom boat in Mauritius and actually swam under it and so on. Kind of does have a fun feel to it. Do you think Titan has a fun feel to it? I don't really. It's like got one window, and you sit on your butt on the floor.
They're strong as the HY100, but they you can't really even. People aren't even manufacturing HY100 anymore in this country. So the passengers are in the front compartment, looking out of the big window, and I'm standing up behind them. So the passengers, they have the best view and they can see up better than I can, but I have complete situational awareness, which, many times there's been an animal 50 feet. I also have 11 lights on the sub, and where I'm diving, the water is incredibly clear. I routinely see the surface from 500 or 600 feet. So, I sometimes spot animals 100, 200 feet away and am able to then drive the vehicle and show the customers that.
So if you would take the laser pointer and point to the forward past your observation dome.
There.
Yes, what is that fabricated from?
That's cast acrylic. At any given time, there's only 2 or 3 companies in the world that make those, and that is a spare for the Beaver Submersible, which I also went to go see. That's now in a museum in the Panhandle of Florida, and I tracked that window down through Andres Galern that had international underwater contractors in a warehouse in New York, and got it for a couple $1,000s because they were never going to use it. And actually, between the front sphere and that window and the amount of water that I have.
Okay, just a quick comment. Thanks a lot, Fractured Fairy Tales. I appreciate that. Interesting name you've got there. Something that I want to draw your attention to. Can you see you've actually got bolts going into the structure there. Let's make it full screen. You can see it over there, over there, over there, over there, over there. I can't quite see on the other side, but that's exactly what they can't do or couldn't do with the Titan. You couldn't insert some kind of hook or something in order to raise the craft out the water, because that would fatally undermine the carbon fiber. And so he's found a way to do that. Obviously, it's a craft that doesn't go nearly as deep, but you can see just how there are some differences in how he can work with his vessel and how Stockton couldn't. I actually spoke about that at some length in the video that I posted a couple of moments ago. Put some pictures up as well. Anyway, let's watch a bit further.
To launch in at the end of this dock, those were some of my defining design criteria.
And when you track down that sphere, that dome, did it come with certification as to its depth rating capacity?
It was originally certified. So the thing with those windows is the semi-spherical windows basically expire after 20 years from the date of being manufactured. And the number one thing that breaks down a window like that is UV radiation. And I feel very comfortable using that window because it was literally in the box that it was originally shipped in, and it receives, the only UV radiation it receives is when I'm driving in and out for 10 minutes, because as soon as I come to the dock, not only is my dock covered with a roof, but I've made a custom fiberglass cover that slips over that and no sunlight touches it.
If we could go to the next page in the lower left corner, there are some, these are publicly available specifications for your
Mhm.
vessel. And down in the lower left, it talks about safety features.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see them on the screen, sir. Can you
Yeah,
see them?
I can read them better here.
Okay. Could you talk about the safety features?
So in terms of methods to achieve positive buoyancy, my sub would have the exact same things that Patrick Leahy was talking about the other day. The like both Idabel and a Trident sub have 2 ballast compartments, independent high pressure air sources, and and a drop weight, and the ability to power themselves to the surface using the motors. And in
So they're
addition
kind
to
of
that,
submarine-ish.
well, one thing my sub has actually that,
So you guys do know the difference between a submersible and a submarine. Submarine can power itself, and a submersible basically can't. Certainly can't get itself back to the surface through a motor, put it that way.
most subs don't have is the fully redundant propulsion systems, because something that's fairly unique about my operation is I don't use a surface boat of any kind for support. But the downside of that is that if I had, say, a motor fail and the wind was blowing me towards the reef, potentially I could get washed up on the reef before a boat that I would call for assistance could tow me back in. And so because of that, I have 4 motors for main propulsion with separate battery banks and completely independent wiring, so that any component can fail and I can still come in on my own power.
So I've looked at a nautical chart of where you operate. So from your dock to get out to deep water where you conduct the majority of your dives, how far is that in terms of time that you're underway to get there?
It's, well, distance-wise, it's 800 to 1,000 feet, and time, depending on the sea state, 8 to 12 minutes.
Well,
You
that's
can
short,
take that
huh?
down. Thank you, Lieutenant. So some general questions about your experience as a submersible operator and pilot. So are you aware of any formal training available for submersible pilots?
It seems to be mostly by the manufacturers. I know that Trident has like an in-house simulator. I actually recently, well, last year, I was in Curacao and I went down in both of the subs they had there, and I was actually on a training dive with somebody that was paying for one of their courses. So yes, I'm aware.
Do you know if the formal training for submersible pilots offers, at the completion of the training, certification, like a certificate saying that you've completed that training?
In the case of Curasub, yes. In where U-Boat works, I would imagine Trident gives you a certificate.
So you mentioned the hull portion of the Idabel that carries your passenger. Can you talk about the the area where you as the operator sits, and is that a separate pressure vessel?
No, it's all connected. It's 3 spheres, and the best way to think of it is kind of like a snowman sitting down. There's a small, medium, and large, and it makes an L. And I'm actually standing in the rear, and I have a little board that I can pop out and I lean against, but it's better to be able to keep turning around and have situational awareness.
And are all those spheres made of the same material?
No, the front one is the HY100, and the 2 in the rear are the 516 grade 70. And then there's a forged ring connecting the 2 largest spheres that's 4 inches by 4 inches, weighs about 400 pounds, and has a 24-inch opening.
So you talked about the number of test dives. Were any material testing, was any material testing done on the hulls after they were assembled?
Well, I've personally taken the sub down 2,660 feet, which is plus 33, plus 0.33. ABS standards is 0.25, and the deepest dive I offer tourists is 2,000.
So there was no unmanned pressure testing conducted?
I didn't have the budget for that. And it would have also been, at this point, I would have to ship it all the way back to Maryland.
And that would be the Deep Ocean Test Facility?
Correct.
So in general, would you describe the Ida Bell as a commercial vessel?
Yes.
And then what do you call the people that go on your,
Good question. I doubt whether he calls them mission specialists.
excursions on the Ida Bell?
Passengers.
Passengers.
Yeah.
I would also note I've had a lot of scientists. There's no question I've done real science. I've had a fish named after Ida Bell that I discovered a new species of fish.
That's
I've
interesting.
had the curator of mollusks from the Natural History Museum do multiple dives with me, specialists in deep sea coral, many papers published, worked in conjunction with Schmidt Ocean Institute. And I don't give away dives to scientists. They're customers like everybody else. I'm providing a service, and
Yeah.
and that really has been the way that submersibles have operated. It's only recently that now that these submersibles are mostly being operated by billionaires on their yachts, that the billionaires are courting scientists, and which has actually devastated funding for other subs that relied on scientists' money that were, for example, the Hawaiian Undersea Research Lab or the Johnson Sea Links, because when you have a billionaire saying, hey, come on my yacht, my chef's going to cook you food, you have a private cabin and a hot tub, because they want the tax breaks. You could have a 500-foot yacht, and if you have a scientist on board that published a paper, now all of a sudden everything was a tax write-off.
You see how Stockton is thinking here. So if you bring that aspect into it, well, we're actually not a tourism business. We actually, or if you're the billionaire, we're not actually on vacation. We're actually here doing science. So it's a tax write-off. Are you really doing science though? Or are you trying to save money or make money?
So to some extent, Stockton was really just looking around and seeing what other people were doing and playing the game. But obviously, the way he said a missions, I don't agree with the terminology mission specialist, but
Yeah.
by giving scientists dive time, this is something that's being done across the industry now, which is a relatively new phenomenon. But it's not something that I do. I charge scientists.
And you mentioned you don't agree with the term mission specialist. Why not?
It's clearly a dodge of trying to get around US regulations with passengers. I think Guillermo's testimony made that perfectly clear.
Do passengers on the Ida Bell, do they sign waivers?
No.
Why is that?
I would use the cliche of we're all in the same boat together, and I feel extremely safe going in my vessel. B, the scenario where they would be injured or perish and I wouldn't is even more of an outlier, and I honestly don't see it as a good use of my time.
So does the government of Honduras offer registration or flagging of a vessel such as the Ida Bell?
Yeah, my subs have always been registered in Honduras. I would also note that I've had 2 Honduran presidents down in my subs, well, in Ida Bell as VIPs, as well as a vice president. There was one dive I had the acting president, and he wanted to bring his bodyguard, and then the vice president spoke up, and I ended up taking, first and second in chain of command on one dive.
Did you charge those government officials?
I didn't charge them.
So at any time, does the government of Honduras inspect the Ida Bell?
They have inspected it.
And do they use any kind of inspection standards? In other words, at one time you mentioned your first vessel, it was a certain length, so it would be classed in a certain unmotorized, I'm paraphrasing, you said a canoe.
They're mostly concerned with overall size and tonnage. That's what kind of motors, how powerful they are. Basic information. I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that the majority of the world's countries have never had a submersible operate from them, maybe visit them on a boat, but to be based out of. I mean, south of the United States, in the entire Western Hemisphere, there's my operation, the 2 subs in Curacao, and there was one in Costa Rica, which is no longer operating, and there's one that the Argentina Coast Guard has. That's it for the whole rest of the Western Hemisphere. So it's not really a major concern for most of the countries.
So what's the inspection interval by Honduran government officials? Is it annual? Or?
It's, I have to renew my registration every year, sometimes 2 years. It's actually sporadic.
So it's not on a fixed schedule?
I would say a lot of government functions in Honduras are a bit sporadic.
So has the government in Honduras or any other government ask you to participate in like drills or exercises that would be so that those forces could assist you if you had a dive emergency at depth?
No, but they have asked me to, and I have participated in helping them look for missing persons. And I actually retrieved a missing person. That wasn't at the government's request, but the widow's request, and found her dead husband and brought him back up.
So if you did get in distress in the submersible, where would be the nearest, and I'm talking about at considerable depth, where is the nearest rescue rescue asset, such as another submersible or ROV?
More than 72 hours.
So now I want to turn your attention to your experience with OceanGate.
Here we go.
So in general, could you just talk about your experience and your interaction with OceanGate since you became aware of the company and when that was, and just give us this general overview?
So I was looking back through all my emails, and my relationship with Stockton goes back at least 10, possibly up to 15 years. definitely Pete Hoffman, that he's basically the one that parted out the Perry 1503 and built Antipodes in his garage. He was a close friend of mine. He came down to Honduras and took a dive with me. I think it was the last sub dive he ever did, and he was probably instrumental in connecting Stockton and I. But I think we also saw each other regularly at the meetings in New Orleans, underwater intervention that Will Cohen chairs. That's really been the only and the largest gathering of industry professionals that I've been going to for years. And you know, I went out to Washington. I saw Antipodes. I did a dive in Antipodes with Stockton in Puget Sound. And when I learned that he was making a carbon fiber sub, I was excited about it. I thought that, you know, that it was there. People have been, even the Navy, actually mostly the Navy, has been making tests and publishing papers on the possibility of composite pressure vessels for decades, maybe even 40, 50 years. And composite technology has gotten a lot better in 40 or 50 years. And even back then, the test results they were getting were in very encouraging with basically rudimentary fiberglass. And so when I heard he was doing something out of carbon fiber, I told him, you know, I want to be a part of that. I saw that as an opportunity to dive deeper than I probably would have ever gotten to dive again. And I went out to Washington and I gave him a week of free labor working on the first version of the launch and recovery vehicle. Well, not free. It was with the understanding that one day somewhere when the carbon fiber vehicle was done, that I was going to get a ride, which is basically what happened.
And then what happened in your relationship with OceanGate?
Well, you know, so, I mean, I basically just got an email from him out of the blue saying, this is your chance, come to the Bahamas. And I did. And we dove to over 12,000 feet. And there were around 30 people there. Renata was there. There were a lot of other mission specialists in waiting that were clearly eager to go. And they were basically, you know, I was there about a week and we had this whole small resort rented out in Marsh Harbor. Stockton and I were staying in the same house so they had the whole resort filled up, and then they had a bunch of extra houses that rented out. And actually I slept outside in a hammock, but you know, we would have meals together. And when we went out, it was Stockton, myself, not sure how to say his name, but he was in his early 20s, and he was a sonar technician for a third-party supplier, I believe, and his duty was something like calibrating the sonar. And then it was a friend of Stockton from childhood who was, I believe, the COO on the company, and he told us to be prepared for noises. And
here we
he
go.
had recently done the solo dive on his own, and basically just said, you know, this is going to make noise and brace yourselves. And Do you guys have the acoustic emissions real-time monitoring graph for that dive? Has that surfaced at all?
Yeah, yesterday.
So can we just specify the time frame at all of what we're discussing?
April
Yes.
of 2018,
That was the first Titan hull.
the first hull, yeah.
I don't believe we have that as an exhibit, sir.
Uh,
The acoustics for that hull.
Yeah. I would be very curious to see that if you ever
Hmm.
come across it in your investigation. But
So April of 2018?
I believe so.
2019.
Well, I mean, we need to figure that out, right?
Right. Could that have been April 2019, sir?
What's the page one? Yeah, I'm sorry, 2019.
April 2019. Here's an article that sort of clarifies it. OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush created a mousetrap for billionaires, says friend. That's a friend of his saying this. And it also says that he went down there, doesn't it say here? Stanley had been on a dive with Rush in the Bahamas in 2019. Said that he had no doubt in his mind that it was the carbon fiber tube that was the mechanical part that failed. I've been saying the same thing. Anyway, let's go on.
So if you would continue. Now,
Yeah.
you were just speaking about the sonar tech and those test dives. So
Yeah.
continue, please.
So there were 4 of us in there, and in retrospect, there were a lot of red flags that now, after the implosion and learning more and putting different pieces of the puzzle together, start making sense and are kind of clues. But so there are 4 of us in there. Obviously, there could have been 5. There are many people back on shore that would have eagerly, he would have been appeasing customers waiting to go, filling that 5th seat. But there was only the 4 of us. And it made a lot of noise. And when we got down there, and another clue in retrospect is we didn't tow out. It's a fairly gentle sloping bottom. We had to go much farther offshore than I would need to go that deep off of Roatan. I mean, we were probably 10 or 12 miles offshore. And he chose to stop the towing a little shallow. We could have easily gone a little deeper, and that would have been a better test. But I think that was an indication of his lack of faith in that vessel.
Wow.
And when we got down there,
That's quite an interesting point he makes, saying, so, I mean, yeah, you're dealing with a really experienced, hands-on, practical, don't get sidetracked by the certification side. This is a guy who's doing the work, and Stockton's kind of a newbie, right? And they kind of both want to do the same thing, submersible tourism. And Stockton doesn't know what he's doing. Stockton is diving too shallow. When the craft is eventually built, this guy's like, I'm not really impressed with this. It doesn't sound very good to me, right?
he didn't do any of the driving in my recollection. He immediately, I believe I was the first one to drive, but he
Wow.
basically insisted, it was his idea, nobody asked to drive, had each of us drive. And I think that was his kind of sick way of, if we had imploded, we were a little bit in control of our own destiny, because when we were driving, we were needing to go towards deeper water to, I mean, the idea was really we were trying to get to the exact depth of the Titanic to confirm the hull was safe for that depth. And, you know, he knew at that point what the cross section of the hull looked like. He knew that it had been hit by lightning. He knew that his engineer had quit, that would refuse to go in it, that the Lockridge was refusing. I didn't know any of these things.
Are you basing that on testimony that you have viewed here at the,
Wired magazine articles, talking to other people involved in things I've learned in the last year.
Right,
OceanGate?
so I think that would be important to understand if Mr. Stanley is talking about conversations he had with Mr. Rush at the time, or if this is speaking now. After there's been obviously a lot of information.
So yeah, Mr. Stanley, just to clarify, you're making that position on
From
what you
things
think-
I've learned after the implosion. These are things that Rush never told me.
Yes, sir. And it's from social media and media reports.
And being here and talking to people directly.
Understand? Sir.
Yes, if you could just limit to your answers to the time frame before the accident occurred on June 18th of what you knew then.
Okay. So we got down there and it's making noises that, the sound of a carbon fiber band breaking when it's in a 5-inch thick matrix is a lot of energy being released.
Definitely.
And we were all clearly a little disnerved, but he had warned us, and I think nobody wanted to be the one to, say they wanted to go up first. But I remember that
Like a
at one
pissing
point when I
contest.
was driving, the bottom was a very gentle slope, and you didn't have a compass in front of you. The compass was on the screen, I believe, and you were actually able to drive to deeper water, and the window was a little distorting in terms of being able to tell the slope on the bottom, but you could actually drive to deeper water by the cracking sounds would amplify when you got deeper. And at some point, I don't remember who, we were all like, well, that's probably close enough. We've been down here long enough. And we went back up. And what I wrote him in the emails, and which is even more concerning than the cracking sounds that happened on the way down or while we were at the bottom, is that
Cracking
there
sounds on
was
the way up.
a kind of like a grand finale of cracking sounds as we were getting close to the surface,
Yeah.
which I'm not a carbon fiber expert, but just thinking about it logically, the only way that you get a whole lot of more cracking when you're coming back up is that material degraded so much that it stored energy that was then released as the pressure was released. And, that's what I wrote him in the email. And right, so I'm not allowed to talk about the 11 square feet of visible delamination that is now on the public record.
Well, we're focusing right now on what you knew up to the 18th of June, the accident day in 2023.
Okay, well, I didn't know about, all I knew at that point was what I heard. And that was enough for me to write these emails.
Let's see
I
that.
hadn't seen anything. I hadn't been told anything. And just off of that information, how many emails back and forth over more than a year?
So you had mentioned a lightning strike. Did Mr. Rush or anybody at OceanGate prior to your dive on that Titan hull, did they tell you that there was a lightning strike in the vicinity of the Titan hull in the Bahamas?
I don't believe so. I think the first time I heard
That's
of a lightning
huge.
strike was reading about it.
Is that
Do you
true or
know
is
the
it
damage
bullshit?
a lightning strike will do to a vessel?
I'm sure it would be extensive, especially to a carbon fiber hull that's conductive.
If you had known that, would you have gone on the test dive?
No. If I had known there had been there's a lot of things that if I had known, I wouldn't have gone. People have told me that I was, stupid, naive, but really what it came down to was at that point, I had no reason to believe that Stockton was a liar, and I had no evidence of any lies on his part. And when he said that he did a proper amount of testing, and
I believed him.
he's a trained engineer, he's not an idiot, he's got this whole organization behind him. It didn't a lot of the things I've learned in the last 18 months or whatever have been very shocking.
So you mentioned the sound of carbon fiber snapping or breaking in a 5-inch thick carbon fiber hull. How do you know what that sounds like?
Because I was there and I heard it.
Well, I mean, how did you identify that it was the sound of carbon fibers snapping?
What else could it be?
You could even localize where it was coming from. We were hearing it so often that the first couple times it was disnerving. And
Unnerving.
then when it kept happening, I remember I was the one that was able to isolate the area where it was coming from and told them this is the area, and was listening right there. It's also a clue to me about Stockton's psychology in terms of, I tested both my vehicles myself solo. I've heard things underwater, but to be 2 miles underwater by yourself in something that your engineer wouldn't go in, was hit by lightning, and you've seen a cross section of that hull.
Yeah.
That's
mad.
He was scared, because if he wasn't scared, he would have already isolated where the noises were coming from on his first dive. When I isolated the area, that was new information to him. But he was down there by himself, scared, and he kept going. That to me is
mad.
Not somebody with I have a high tolerance to risk. I've done a lot of adrenaline seeking activities, but I don't believe normal behavior.
So after that dive that you were on, where you heard those sounds, we've heard testimony in here that some acoustic sounds heard inside the submarine by the real-time monitoring system, which is an acoustic emission, right? Could be the frame shifting as opposed to the hull. So after you came up from the dive, did you partake in any meeting where the results of the real-time monitoring acoustic sensors were examined by the group and tried to isolate where the sound occurred?
I personally never saw any data from the real-time monitoring system. I didn't see the screen. I actually thought perhaps the whole system was a bit of a sham until the last couple days testimony. That information was not shared with me. He didn't think much of he didn't have me sign a waiver, and he never gave me a spiel about how everything's transparent and please ask any questions. It was just like, you're here, let's go.
And did you understand that hull, which we've used different terms for, we've used the term prototype and so forth, that hull, if it completed successful testing in the Bahamas, was intended to go out on a Titanic expedition following the completion of those tests in the Bahamas?
Yeah, that's why all those mission specialists were there. They were jonesing to go. He had everything lined up. And relayed in my emails trying to tell him that there
Well
was
said,
no.
Mel.
I remember conversations with him too around that time in the Bahamas in person, where I was still giving him the benefit of the doubt of, okay, maybe you've done enough testing and you know it makes so much noise and nobody's going to die. I kept trying to tell him, you do not have a marketable product. You are going to get out there, and if you have 4 people plus yourself in there and it's making things anything like what we heard, one of those people is going to say, hell no, I want to go back to the surface.
Yeah.
So, and how's that a good business model? Like now, you know? And then I also, things were not working on the sub properly on our dive. There was something wrong with the drop weights. There were issues we had plenty of issues. And, you know, any new vehicle is going to have issues. And the more unique and one-off it is, and the more things that you're doing that haven't been done before, the more issues you're going to have. Everything about this vehicle hadn't been done before. I mean, all the systems. He hated buying something off the shelf if he thought he could rig it together himself.
Yeah.
And I also was making the point to him from a businessman perspective, like, what's your refund policy going to be? Like, I mean, like, to me, it's very cut and dry. In my operation, you know, if I have to end a dive early, I tell my customers, I'm like, you want the good news or the bad news? Which is basically like, we're going to have to go up and the dive's ending short, but it was free. Like, I could not have the reviews I have on TripAdvisor with his
He's a good guy.
business philosophy of,
Fair.
well, you'll get a credit for next year. Like, what the hell is that? And so it was obvious that he wasn't even going to have a 50% rate of dives without major issues. So when you're charging people 6 figures, how are you, just from a business perspective, the whole thing seemed completely premature.
So it's quite a important point he's making here, where he says, and bear in mind, this is a seasoned submariner, right? This is a guy who doesn't mind a bit of risk. I mean, he went down there without signing a waiver, and he's kind of getting really nervous, really anxious, right? And he's saying, you know what, this isn't going to work, because most people, I'm one of them, by the way, I'm sure many of you are as well. If you're going down in this craft and it starts banging and popping, you're going to say, I mean, if you got into it to begin with, you're probably going to say, I want to turn back. Like, I'm not very happy with this, right? That's not a good business model. You know, that's what he's saying. You don't want people in your craft and then they having a nervous experience. Like, they're not having an authentic experience. They trying to hide away their terror. And the only people who are really enjoying it are the totally head over heels Titanic fanatics. Well, how many of those are there? Well, I suppose there are a couple of hundred maybe. But, I mean, don't you want people who are also more just like a cross-section of ordinary folk? So literally you're going down there and you're hearing these noises, and you can only kind of wonder, was P.H. Nargile also so head over heels that it was clouding his common sense? You know, I'm talking about for the Titanic, for his obsession.
So I wanted,
One moment, please, Mr. Fawcett. OceanGate, do you have a comment?
I'm just not sure what the question was, actually.
Mr. Fawcett, what?
yes, it was, were you aware that the Titan submersible, if it successfully passed its testing regime in the Bahamas, if it was going out on the Titanic mission that year, once those tests were complete?
And so that was my answer. I mean, this was a main point of contention and argument that I had with Stockton in person in the Bahamas, was from a business perspective, how are you going to keep delivering a partial product to a customer
Mm.
and you're in the middle of the ocean and you've already basically spent, doesn't cost him any less if he has to end a dive early. He should really get everything figured out ahead of time and then take it out there.
So the first test dive in the Bahamas was only Mr. Rush.
I believe so. I wasn't there for that, but that's what I believe.
The second one is the dive you participated in.
I believe so.
When did you leave the Bahamas? Were you there for the completion of the test dives?
I'd have to look at I think I was there about a week.
Excuse me, Mr. Fawcett, is there a basis for saying that was the second dive? We can't actually look at the log. Or if Mr. Stanley knows if he was there for the entirety of the time that the Titan was in the Bahamas and knows which number dive his was?
Do you recall if you were on the second dive of the test hull of the Titan?
I believe that the dive previous to the one I was on was the one that Stockton did by himself.
Thank you.
Wow.
So
Stockton didn't first do the
Exhibit
dive by
85
himself.
are extracted emails between yourself and Mr. Stockton Rush. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
And we're looking at the year 2019. In the first email, I'd like you to take a moment and Lieutenant Steele will pull up the first page just for a general overview, but you've been provided the exhibit. If you'll take a minute,
I just want to go back
you
to
sent
that.
an
By himself. Week.
Excuse me, Mr. Fawcett, is there a basis for saying that was the second dive? We can't actually look at the log. Or if Mr. Stanley knows if he was there for the entirety of the time that the Titan was in the Bahamas and knows which number dive his was?
Do you recall if you were on the second dive of the test hull of the Titan?
I believe that the dive previous to the one I was on was the one that Stockton did by himself.
Oh, okay. That's better. That makes
Thank you.
sense.
So Exhibit 85 are extracted emails between yourself and Mr. Stockton Rush. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
And we're looking at the year 2019. In the first email, I'd like you to take a moment and Lieutenant Steele will pull up the first page just for a general overview, but you've been provided the exhibit. If you'll take a minute, you sent an email on April 18th, 2019, I believe, to Mr. Rush. Can you characterize generally the contents of that email and what your concerns were?
Do you have that exhibit, OceanGate?
It's the one that's right there.
Yes, the first email. And,
Yes.
but we are not, just to clarify, we're not using the exhibit, just Mr. Stanley's characterization of what he said?
No,
Okay, we are, okay.
I'm asking him in the interest of time to characterize the contents of the email.
Quite a bit that's
Can we take a
redacted
10-minute
there.
break?
Yes. The hearing will recess and reconvene at 1:50.
Cool. Let's have a look at this email.
So
Almost
you're talking
there.
about
Let's go back.
quality of work I did for you in Washington was excellent, and you enjoyed reading my exchange with Bruce Jones. And what was the work you conducted for Mr. Rush in Washington?
Okay, I'm going to read this email before they do. April 18, 2019, sent 11:44 a.m. on a Thursday. Stockton, thanks again for the amazing opportunity you afforded me yesterday. So it's really written very close to, everything's still fresh in his mind. While I know we have a special connection running sister subs, the quality of the work I did for you in Washington was excellent. The quality of work I did for you Washington, WA? And you enjoyed reading my exchange with, I think the main reason I got this opportunity to dive might have the most to do with if there was such a thing as expert in risk assessment in one-off, well, look at that, in one-off uncertifiable deep sea manned vehicles. My resume is hard to beat. And we are like-minded when it comes to judging how far things can safely be pushed. as such, this is my opinion analysis of what I've seen here. Now, the people who were mocking this dude, undermining this dude, saying, well, you don't have any qualifications. At this point, he's far more qualified in terms of his experience, in terms of his know-how, in terms of practical knowledge than Stockton, who's an engineer who studied at Princeton, right? And so here he's giving him advice, and it's pretty well worded. He says, while I think your concept is sound, I'm not sure it applies in this case. The sounds we observed yesterday do not seem consistent with glue joints breaking, right? And whatever we've been hearing OceanGate folks saying went wrong, including, trying to remember the guy's name, that one engineer actually put up a video of him. They're saying it's glue. The glue went through cyclical fatigue. No, it's not the glue. The glue is an excuse to not talk about carbon fiber. He goes on to say air cavities breaking or the random weak fiber breaking. What we heard, in my opinion, and I think after the discussion someone and I had last night, I can say he shares this opinion, sounded like a flaw defect in one area being acted on, and I think what he means here, one area of the carbon fiber being acted on by the tremendous pressures and being crushed, damaged. From the intensity of the sounds, the fact that they never totally stopped at depth, and the fact that there were sounds at 300 feet, is what he's just testified, indicating a relaxing of stored energy. And anyway, that's quite a straight shoot in this email,
I
right?
was working on the first launch platform,
And then Bruce,
LRT, or yeah.
so you're talking
So
about
it was
the launch-
Washington, okay.
the first launch platform, which would have been used for which submersible?
Probably Cyclops 1.
And then Mr. Jones,
That was a former partner at Trident.
and then reading down into that email, it would be, it's highlighted there, that portion. You say the sounds we observed yesterday do not seem consistent with glue joints breaking, air cavities breaking, or random weak fiber breaking. What we heard, in my opinion, and I think after the discussion Joel and I had last night, I can say he shares this opinion. Sounded like a flaw, defect in one area being acted on by the tremendous pressures and being crushed, damaged.
So can you guys see there at the bottom? I understand you're under enormous pressure from investors, people that have been waiting to go, people that are literally dying to go. Well, yeah, literally, and so on. He's definitely playing a dangerous game here, right?
From the intensity of the sound, the fact that they were never totally stopped at depth, and the fact that there were sounds at about 300 feet that indicated a relaxing of stored energy would indicate there is an area of the hull that is breaking down, getting spongy. So you had mentioned you had thought you had identified a specific area of the hull where the sounds emanated from. Is that what you're speaking about here?
Correct.
And what area of the hull would that be?
I remember it being low and towards the flange.
And is the flange where the carbon fiber hull is mated to the titanium rings?
Yes.
At the time you made your dive, what was the interior of the submarine? Was there a liner that prevented a person?
There was. You couldn't see the hull directly.
Was it the forward dome, the forward being where the observation port was, or was it the after dome?
I think towards the observation dome, but I can't remember. I can't remember for sure.
So Mr. Rush replied to you, and that would be on May 23rd, 2019. And we've highlighted that.
Okay, let's just read the next paragraph. A useful thought exercise here would be to imagine the removal of the variables of the investors, the eager mission scientists, I think he means mission specialists, your team hungry for success, the press releases already announcing the summer's dive schedule. And that is such a wise and kind of diplomatic way of putting it here, that it was exactly what Stockton needed to be told. Imagine this project was self-funded and on your own schedule. Would you consider taking dozens of other people to the Titanic before you truly knew the source of those sounds? Excuse me, well said, huh?
We had discussions after.
Then he also says, another way I like to make decisions is by considering worst case scenarios. The worst case scenario of delaying diving until you have identified the defect, making all that noise, is some disappointed customers and financial woes. The worst case scenario of pushing ahead and not listening to the whole yelling at you. I mean, he's really saying it, eh? You're not listening to the whole yelling at you. And some Russian oligarch tooling around a Russian nesting doll. Okay. Yeah. I hope you see option B as unacceptable as I do. And what's the answer, did he?
In person. When I,
Hang on just one second. Can you scroll down to, it starts, yes, we are shooting for, it's up on the screen now, sir.
okay,
So these are Stockton's words. Yes, we are shooting for a few more, as many as 5 4,000-meter dives, that's Titanic depth dives, to get added acoustic data and operational experience, especially charging at sea and back-to-back daily dives. Our analysis of the past dive shows a definite reduction in acoustic events, but only having data from 2 full operating depth dives does not make for much of a validating trend. Are you back to operational, or does the government still have you in handcuffs? Best regards, Stockton.
So he says, yes, we are shooting for a few more, as many as 5 4,000, I'm assuming that means dives, to get added acoustic data.
I don't know. I find that last comment of him almost like he's saying it so that Karl would be reticent about republishing this email because it makes him look bad, Karl Stanley, which I think is a bit mischievous if that is what he was trying to do.
And operational experience, especially charging at sea and back to daily dives.
Objection. Mr. Fawcett, is this email a response to the other one? Because it seems just the first phrase we just read seems like an answer to a question that was not, yes, we're shooting. I know these are excerpts, but it's not clear to me that this is a continuous conversation. So I just want to make that clear.
Do you know if you received emails between the email we just discussed?
Or just
in
look at the
April
date.
And this date?
this is the complete email chain, but I don't know what day I left the Bahamas, but I know I was still
I thought so.
in the Bahamas, staying in the same house when he got the first email from me. And I remember there being like a large meeting with maybe 20 people. And when there was a chance, he kind of signaled to me that we were going to talk privately about what I had emailed. We had conversations about the content of the first email before he gave me this written response.
So this is your first written response to your original email?
Correct.
Our analysis of the past dive shows a definite reduction in acoustic events, but only having
I'm convinced that Stockton was very wary of written evidence, like we used to say in the old days, a paper trail. This, I guess, is a digital trail. I think Stockton was very wary of people sending him emails, which is essentially a digital trail saying that shit was happening on your submersible, and I'm telling you about it. You should know about it, but if you don't know about it, here I am telling you about it, essentially putting it on the record, right? And here it is on the record, right? And how does he respond? Well, very briefly, it's very kind of cagey. And he says, our analysis shows a definite reduction in acoustic events, Is that reality? Is that what Carl Stanley experienced? Because his analysis with his ears sitting there was that it was getting more and more sounds breaking. And then they went up, and then what did he describe it as? A grand finale of cracking sounds as we were getting back to the surface. That doesn't sound like an analysis showing a definite reduction. It sounds like the opposite. No analysis, and there's a experience of an alarming cacophony of cracking noises that makes another submersible operator, moves him to say, dude, you need to shut everything down and get this sorted out. This isn't like business as usual. This is business unusual. Stop what you're doing and go back to the drawing board, essentially, right?
Data from 2 full operating dives, does not make for much validating trend, much of a validating trend. Did that response related to your experience as a submersible pilot and your experience on a dive concern you?
I mean, obviously, I was very much concerned that I kept sending him emails for over a year, and I didn't even know a fraction of what we know now.
Objection, when we're saying over a year, I believe these emails are a month apart. Is there a different set of emails we're talking about that's over a course of 1 year?
There are 8 pages of them.
Yeah, they're all from May through June 2019, at least every single one in this exhibit.
Okay, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to read this as well. The reason I'm reading it is they don't read everything, and I think we want the more complete context. So, yeah, he writes, I want to share this with you. 2 to 7 dives to operating depth are too few to launch an expedition selling 6-figure tickets in the middle of the ocean. This is what Carl Stanley is saying to Stockton. You're not doing enough test dives. He says, I think 50 is a good number. Not 2 to 7, 50. That's how many dives I had in the Seabug before taking customers. And it's the number of skydives you need for a B license, which allows you to go at night, land on water, try a wingsuit. I think that hull has a defect near the flange that will only get worse. The only question in my mind is, will it fail catastrophically or not? There it is. The only question in my mind is it going to fail catastrophically or not? And what did happen? It did fail catastrophically. Then he says, the fact that you indirectly told me to not speak about the noises I heard on the dive, to me, says a lot. Don't speak about the noises. As you know, my subs have had many issues and incidents over the years. At no point did I find it necessary to tell anyone not to speak of what they saw or heard. I've told journalists openly about my most exciting subsea moments. I feel my customers make 100% informed consent, or at least have access to all the information to do so if they choose to do. And so, yeah, you see the difference between the standards of one operator who's running a tourist submersible. It's kind of gimmicky, but it's shallow, basically advising another dude whose entire operation is kind of a joke, a kind of a gimmick that he can see from a mile away is just not workable. And he's already warning Stockton I think in 2019, 4 years ahead of time. He's saying the only question is it going to fail catastrophically or not? He knew, right?
Oh. Okay.
Okay,
So
so
just
we'll
to
still-
clarify, these emails are from between the dates of April and June of 2019, not over the course of the year, unless there are additional emails that we do not have here.
My bad. I still thought 2018 for some reason.
Okay, so for the record, we have about 3 months of email exchange.
Correct. That's all we have, sir. And they're here in this exhibit, redacted.
Okay, so Mr. Stanley, can you keep the testimony, at least when we're directly quoting the emails to this
Okay.
series? Thank you, sir.
So on May 27, 2019, you sent an email to Mr. Rush. And if you'll scroll down, so you said your last email, and you talked about some different, the Smithsonian article and OceanGate latest press release has given me plenty to think about. A few thoughts I wanted to share with you. So the first thought, paragraph A, was 2 to 7 dives to operating depth are too few to launch an expedition selling six-figure tickets in the middle of the ocean. I think 50 is good at, and what would that symbol represent?
A good number.
So how many dives I had in Seabug before taking customers? And it's the
Number of skydives.
you need for a B license, which allows you to go out at night, land on water, try a wingsuit, etc. The second bullet, Bravo thinks, I think the hull has a defect near the flange that will only get worse. The only question in my mind is if it will fail catastrophically. Were you aware that carbon fiber, when it did fail, would fail catastrophically as opposed to just a gradual weakening of the carbon fiber hull?
I don't know that enough, even in the hull that failed, from all the acoustic emission charts we have seen, it did give him warning. He was just ignoring the warnings. So I would argue it wasn't obviously it was a catastrophic failure, but it's not
Far in
like
advance.
glass. It gave him warning. He just chose to ignore it.
But I'm speaking of at the time that you wrote this, did you understand that carbon fiber could fail catastrophically?
Any failure of a pressure hull is catastrophic.
And then finally, you say in paragraph C, the fact that you indirectly told me not to speak about the noises I heard on the dive, to me says a lot. As you know, my subs have had many issues and incidents over the years. At no point did I find it necessary to tell anyone not to speak of what I saw or heard. I have told journalists openly about my most exciting subsea moments. I feel my customers make 100% informed consent, or at least have access to all the information to do so if they choose to do the research. So when you were speaking about your particular experience, what were you speaking about from your moments?
Well, I've had a very long career, over 26, 27 years, 28 years of operating submersibles, with cumulatively in a few more dives, I'll be at 2,400 dives. More than half of those are to 2,000 feet in the 4-hour range. I've done dives up to 24 hours, and I'm operating without surface support in a offshore, essentially, even though it's close to it's my front yard, but it's still the open ocean. There was one time with you want me to list the incidents I've had?
Well, give me an example if you would.
One time, so Seabug, I had to get towed in and out because the motors were only added after the fact and they were right on the water lines, so they didn't give you enough power. They sucked a lot of air, they cavitated, and you had to get towed in and out. And there was one time the boat that towed me out, where I'm operating, as you saw the charts, it's an immediate drop off. It's on the edge of the Cayman Trench. And my passenger took essentially too long to get in, and the wind was blowing us towards the reef. And by the time we were both in and I sealed the hatch and I descended, it was already too shallow and I had to surface. The boat had already left and there were probably 4 or 5 foot waves, and the vehicle got washed up on the shore, which where I live is ancient coral, iron shore.
Wow.
And
Washed
nobody was
ashore.
injured. One of the drop weights on the bottom of the sub was ripped off, and my passenger and I actually carried it together back to the resort I was operating out of at the time, and
Carried
I had
it.
to do repairs on the sub.
Did you tell the passenger not to speak about that incident?
No,
And have you spoken about that incident prior to June
No.
18th, 2023, to Mr. Rush or anybody else?
I, there was a resort full of people. It wasn't being tried to keep any kind of secret, but I'm not,
Not proud of it.
if anything, I'm too candid with journalists. I mean, I've talked about any kind of incidents I've had in a whole bunch of different magazine articles and things over the years. It's all a matter of public record.
And would that have been before the June 18th, 2023?
Yeah.
So you sent an email to Mr. Rush, which is the next page, on June 2nd, 2019. A highlighted portion,
Whoa. We just missed that last bit there.
In a whole bunch of different magazine
I
articles
saw a reference to Everest.
over the years.
Did
It's all a
you?
matter of public record.
and would that have been before the June 18th, 2023?
Yeah.
So you sent an email to Mr. Rush, which is the next page, on June 2nd.
It says, anyway, those are my opinions. Take them for what they are worth. But I'd say I have more relevant experience than anyone else could have thought of. Have you been following the deaths on Everest? I'm surprised at the willingness of people to risk their lives for that. And I've been making exactly the same comparisons as well. Interesting. Hope this finds you well, Karl.
2019. The highlighted portion, throughout these hearings, we've talked
Okay, let's try and read what we can here. As I told you before, I cancelled last. This is obviously from Stockton. As I told you before, I cancelled last year's expedition, shut down the company before I will operate an unsafe sub. Integrity of the hull, it's certainly something we'll carry out in the Bahamas this month. We've spent millions of dollars over many years, hired several experts in composites, and conducted multiple tests to destruction of carbon fiber pressure vessels in order to generate a body of knowledge which will allow us to accurately assess this hull. Whether the localized acoustic activity we all heard is critical or merely characteristic is yet to be determined. Well, what do you think it is? Your support for 50 dives to what is MOD? Should know. Because MO is, what is your MO? What is your modus operandi? Is that what he's referring to? Starting parachute training is not an apt analogy. You cannot compare experience-based limits like skydiving to vehicle testing. I suspect no deep diving sub did 50 MOD dives before non-essential crew were taken. But I suppose you could do those sort of tests with an unmanned sub or in a artificial situation that recreates that. Anyway, even the Navy does not have that requirement. The more relevant sample would be that the FAA requires only 25 hours of flight testing. So this is how he is thinking about it as an aeronautics engineer. 25 hours of flight testing before passengers are taken in an experimental aircraft. Only one of these flights needs to be maximum dynamic pressure. Anyway.
about the experimental nature of the Titan. There's been testimony about the fact that it was experimental. So in this, he's giving you an example. The more relevant example would be the FAA requires only 25 hours of flight testing before passengers are taken in an experimental aircraft. Only one of these flights needs to be to a maximum dynamic pressure. The aviation equivalent of, I'm assuming that's maximum operating depth, but I'm not sure.
I would assume so.
The required hours
Okay,
can be
maximum
logged in 10
operating
flights or
depth,
fewer,
okay.
and this holds true for my composite airplane and others that use novel structures, material, and configurations. So my following questions relate to the term experimental and your knowledge of experimental, because you're engaging in this give and take. So the Federal Aviation Administration is the government agency that oversees flight aviation. And in the case of the Coast Guard, we oversee the maritime transportation system. So the FAA under U.S. Code CFR 14 CFR 91.319 says that aircraft having experimental certificates operating limitations. The purpose. Experimental aircraft can only be used for the purpose for which they were issued, such as education and personal use. Were you aware of that?
I have not been involved in small aircraft that much. My experience was getting my B license skydiving, and that's what I was comparing his operating experience to, and I compared it to how much experience I felt personally was required to be comfortable with taking passengers with both of my vehicles. I would also note that I was in a meeting, I don't recall if Rush was there or not, but it was in the meeting in New Orleans of the underwater intervention. And there was basically a special meeting because of what OceanGate was doing. And they were looking for discussing some way to try to stop them. And I remember it was only Graham Hawks was there and myself, and we're the only ones that were kind of sticking up for OceanGate in any way. And I said, maybe since we all understand carbon fiber would be exceedingly an expensive, lengthy, basically almost impossible process for a non-state actor to accomplish. For example, the book that's been referenced multiple times, first by Neeson, Jerry Statue's book on acrylics. It's like this thick. At the time, acrylic was a brand new material, and everybody realized it was going to be a valuable thing for viewports, but they needed to figure out what the rules would be. The Navy paid one person to essentially dedicate their life to figuring that out. And acrylic's a fairly easy material to work with. It's homogeneous as a material. It doesn't have hidden pockets or anything like how composites can have. So the amount of research and development that would really have to go into making a carbon fiber submersible that could be used and certified to those depths, you're talking tens of millions of dollars in a decade or two at least of somebody's life.
Let me stop you there, because I was talking about the term experimental for aviation as a comparison to the marine model. So, for clarification, that meeting in New Orleans of the industry experts, do you recall what year that was?
No. But the point I was trying to make with that is I proposed in that room, maybe we can all just agree to insist that he at least gets 50 dives under his belt, and that's going to mitigate a lot of this risk. And Graham Hawks was like, yes, I think that's a good number, because he's also had issues getting composite vehicles. He ended up finally getting them certified, I believe, but it was a lengthy process and only for about if he had done just 50 dives to operating depth, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, that's true.
So that meeting that was part of the New Orleans conference, was that on the printed agenda so I could research that meeting and see that that meeting was part of that conference or symposium?
Most likely, yes. Will Cohen would have been the organizer, and he's testifying tomorrow. He would probably know.
So under the same discussion of experimental for the Federal Aviation Administration's rules, they say compensation. Did you know that the experimental aircraft cannot be used to carry people or property for compensation or hire?
That sounds vaguely familiar, but again, I'm not that familiar with experimental aircraft.
It further states it must be inspected by a certified repairman designated for light sport aircraft with a maintenance rating. Would you know that?
I've never heard that, but that sounds like a good rule.
Objection. Does Mr. Stanley have any basis to answer these questions?
Yeah, Mr. Fawcett, he already said that he's not familiar with the experimental aircraft rules.
So moving on, later in your email, you respond to Mr. Rush's comments regarding
Whoa,
the
whoa, whoa,
FAA
whoa, whoa.
experimental aircraft and use aircraft with a maintenance rating. Would you know that?
I've never heard that, but that sounds like a good rule.
Objection. Does Mr. Stanley have any basis to answer these questions?
Yeah, Mr. Fawcett, he already said that he's not familiar with the experimental aircraft rules.
So move.
Okay, so he also writes here, in addition, an arbitrary dive number is the wrong approach for structural testing, as it can mask cyclic issues, damage and corrosion. I don't know if I agree with that. I think it's the opposite, is it can unmask cyclic issues. Anyone seriously concerned about hull failure should use real-time monitoring. Okay, that's asinine. Well, he didn't even pay attention to that himself. This is why a functioning acoustic monitoring system is a steadfast no-go. Okay.
Moving on.
Then he also writes here, your recent emails tell me that we have had two fundamental misunderstandings. Sorry about this. The first is regarding your role while visiting us in the Bahamas. I value your experience and advice on many things, but not on assessment of carbon fiber pressure hulls. It's basically saying, back off, shut up. I don't want to hear your assessment. You misunderstand. I don't really want to hear what you think, right? And I don't want to hear what you think about carbon fiber pressure hulls. Don't tell me what to do and don't tell me what you think. The second, even more disturbing misunderstanding is your concern that I will either intentionally or unintentionally succumb to pressure and take advantage of our clients. Well, he's right. It is even more disturbing, but I don't think it's a misunderstanding. That is what this hearing is really, in part, trying to ascertain, is whether he did exactly that, whether he did succumb to pressure, and whether he did take advantage of clients, going as far as calling them mission specialists. I realize more than anyone that this is the primary pitfall, and I've taken multiple steps to guard against this, really.
Later in your email, you respond to.
And then he says also, as someone who has been on the receiving end of uninformed accusations from industry pundits, this shows the arrogance on steroids, right? I hope you of all people will think twice before expressing opinions on subjects in which you are not fully versed. What a prickly email, right? I hope you of all people will think twice before expressing your opinion on things you don't really know much about. Bit of a slap in the face.
To Mr. Rush's comments regarding.
Then he responded, this is June 3rd, 2019, 4:11 p.m. Dear Stockton, you needn't worry about me expressing my opinions to anyone other than you and a few friends on the island. I'm sure you didn't like to hear that. But I would not in any way try to put pressure on you from people in the industry or anything like that. A, because I see that approach is only making someone as determined as you more likely to go ahead with dives. That seems like quite a accurate assessment of Stockton's stubborn personality. And B, I think there's almost no limit to risks people are willing to accept for such an adventure. That's also true. By the way, I think what I left out of my video that I did on, where it was referring to an article written by Arnie Wiseman, was Wiseman actually said, I was aware of the issues, and he lists them. You know, I was aware of the damage to the platform. I was aware of the problems with carbon fiber. I was aware of this. I was aware of that. And he said, I was willing to take on all those risks. I wanted to go down to Titanic, and come what may, that's what I wanted to do. And 3 dives later, that's when the implosion happened. That a journalist said that, and he literally said that in an article, basically saying it's worth the risk. I'm prepared to take the risk. Although he had an idea that he may not have been fully informed of the situation, and I don't think he was.
The FAA experimental aircraft, and you say on June 2nd,
I would just like to note that even his own cited numbers for experimental aircraft numbers in terms of hours, or he wasn't even meeting those.
Yeah.
But Mr. Stanley, I thought you said you weren't familiar with the
Well, from
experimental
what
aircraft.
Stockton said in his email, his own
Yeah.
criteria that he picked, he didn't even meet.
Yeah.
And the basis for saying that is,
Are you saying he provided a number that was not met in his own
It
email?
was in the last slide. 25 hours of flight. He didn't have 25 hours in Titan before he was willing to take passengers.
and
I
what
don't
is the
know how-
basis for that
Yes,
statement?
sir, I don't know that you can say that.
Okay.
did you have any subsequent conversations with Mr. Rush or anyone at OceanGate after this email chain regarding the safety of operations at OceanGate for Titan, excuse me?
In terms of the ideas expressed in the emails, I didn't feel it was.
Yeah, I must say, I thought that this was the case at the time, that they pretending not to know what happened, and I'm pretty sure they did know what happened. Now we know that that's confirmed, that they ought to have known that there was a run up. Certainly, Karl Stanley, people like Patrick Leahy and others, Lockridge, all of them would basically be saying, I told you so, I warned you, I knew it was going to happen, all that kind of thing. And yet you kind of have the situation where they're going, well, we lost communication. I wonder why. We haven't heard from them for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. I wonder why that is. Maybe, and then the next day, maybe they're still alive, we just can't find them. Next day. They've got 92 hours. Next day. When do you acknowledge the run up to this catastrophe, or do you remain in denial permanently because it's going to make you look bad if you say I made a mistake?
My business to kind of undermine his standing within the company. I did have some brief conversation with the fourth passenger, his friend, and he was visibly shaken after that dive, and to my recollection left the basically quit within a few days after that.
And who is that?
I said his name before, it's escaping me right now.
So in the June 3rd, in
I just want to pause here for a moment. We at the 2 hour mark. I don't really want to go beyond 2 hours just because I'm feeling a little bit run down from literally from running intervals earlier. Aaron, are you in the? Oh, wait till his last statement. Okay. Okay, so we'll stay on for that. I'm taking Aaron's advice here. Thanks, Aaron.
Objection, Mr. Fawcett, before we move off, we're
So
moving off these
see-
emails. I just wanted to clarify that this is not a complete chain. And in fact, there was an email from Mr. Rush to Mr. Stanley, to
221.
which that May 23rd email was a response to. I don't know where, but these are, just for the record, this is not a complete email exchange. And we can provide the complete email exchange that includes emails that were omitted from these excerpts.
Okay, thank you, OceanGate.
Will
If you
do.
can find the additional emails, we will redo the exhibit and add those redacted versions.
Thank you.
Yes, we weren't aware of that, sir. In,
Well, wouldn't I be the one to have those emails?
That
What-
was going to be my question,
So what makes you think that they're missing emails here?
because we have the full email.
Okay, well, I rely on your knowledge, Erin and Lucy. Can I jump forward about 10 minutes? Can I jump forward to say, would they bring out this document? Where is it? It's like got lines on it. I saw it there. Can I jump forward to about there? Or what do you reckon? Yeah, there are about 30 minutes left. Okay, well let's listen.
Email chain, and they're missing emails there.
How do you know an email's missing?
1 second, please. I
Oh.
think that OceanGate, you have the other side of the email chain.
Correct.
Yeah, if you would just provide those to the board, we will make that the exhibit.
We will.
Keith says his closing
on
statement was
June
pretty
3rd
wild.
of
Okay, so I want to go
2019,
forward just a couple of
it's the
minutes.
last 2 pages of the
50 to 40.
email chain that we do have as the exhibit.
Let's go to there.
To see all the dives before this, he really wasn't transparent with that kind of information. I also was extremely curious about if my theory on the hull breaking down in the one area was correct or not, and asked him specifically multiple times to share information or images of the area with the defect when I learned that he had scrapped the hull. And he told me that he had, actually, I don't even think he told me. I think Mike Claudel told me. So I heard through a third source, but he wouldn't share that information with me.
You can go ahead and bring that down. And as we saw in the previous exhibit that Mr. Fawcett had up regarding your emails, at any point within those emails, were you made aware that a crack was identified in the hull according to the maintenance log, was on the 29th of May, 2019?
I learned about the crack from Wired magazine.
And was there a specific Wired magazine article that you heard from?
One of the more recent ones.
Okay, so after the
Quite recently.
quite recent. Is this,
So you don't really get a thing where Stockton says, "Hi, Karl, can I have you? Can you? I want to talk to you about something. Just want to pick your brain. We've got a bit of a crack in the hull. What do you think we should do?" Well, it just doesn't say that to him. It just doesn't communicate that.
had you planned any more dives or any more operations with Mr. Rush after after your dive on the 17th of April, 2019?
It was never discussed. I didn't really have an interest in going to the Titanic. I didn't, I feel also this exchange of emails strained our relationship from what it had been previously. We weren't.
Well, that's quite a statement. He says this exchange of emails actually strained our relationship. And so you can tell that Stockton doesn't want to be told what he doesn't want to hear. He's one of those people who you need to tell him what he wants to hear. Now, I had a friendship with someone like that where you got along really, really well if you played second fiddle to this person. If you kind of, what's the word? It's basically narcissism. It's someone who can only tolerate how great they are, and they need to be the center of the star of the show as well, even if it's not deserving.
I felt like I kind of pushed things as far as I could without just him telling me to shut up and never talk to him again.
Were you ever a member of the MTS or the?
On and off, I have been, yeah.
Were you involved in the drafting of the letter?
Good
They
word,
didn't ask me to
kowtowed.
sign it, but
Kowtow.
I was aware of it.
Thank you, sir. That's all the questions I have for now.
Mr. Stanley, at this time, I'm going to go to the National Transportation Safety Board for questions. Mr. Muse?
Good afternoon, Mr. Stanley. Did Mr. Rush discuss at all how he was going to get Titan and the Lars to the Titanic site, like on the back of a supply boat with a ramp, or was it going to be craned
Good
overboard
question.
or towed out there?
We weren't staying in that close contact in the last couple of years. Most of the information I was getting was from Mike, who now has Antipodes, and he had been on one of the expeditions. He'd actually been bunkmates with PH on one trip, and he was staying much closer with Stockton.
But in this time frame we've been talking about, 2019, you weren't aware, or they didn't share what their plans was on?
We weren't talking like that.
Okay. And my only other question is, where is Seabug now?
I scuttled it in the middle of the bay, and it's like an artificial reef. It probably has a 6-foot green moray eel in it right now.
All right, thank you for your time today.
Mr. Stanley, just have a couple follow-ups from the initial questions. For the Ida Bell, did you ever get that classed?
No.
But you did build it to classification standards?
So for one thing, that window would need to be replaced every 20 years, and you're talking $30,000, $40,000. So Ida Bell,
Wow.
I didn't keep track as carefully of every penny like I did with Seabug, but approximately I had that diving for $100,000. I did all my own welding, the majority of my own machining, my own initial engineering, and I was sleeping either in a hammock or in my car for the year and a half when I was working on it. It was on a very tight budget. And certification, it's great if you're a billionaire or a cruise line or you're running a big ship where the cost of certification probably isn't even one tank of gas on your ocean liner. But their business model is essentially they're charging by the hour, and they let you know when they're done. They don't even quote you a price up front. And the longer the process draws out and the more complicated it is, the more money they're making. And that simply, it would have easily doubled or tripled the cost of the initial construction of Ida Bell.
It actually, did you hear what he said? Certifying it could have easily doubled or tripled the cost of the craft. Now imagine if you wanted to buy a car, right? And to have it certified is going to cost 3 times the cost of the car. How are you going to feel about that? It's not really a good example, but it just gives you an idea of, would you want to spend 3 times the value of a car on certifying the car? I mean, we all buy cars that do meet safety standards, so it's not a really good example, but it kind of makes it accessible in a sense. What is the other thing that I wanted to mention? Anyway, let's continue.
Yeah.
And so I think you mentioned that when you were aware.
Oh, sorry. The other thing I want to mention is you kind of get a sense that the dudes that certify this craft are kind of like lawyers, and lawyers can do the same thing. You give them your case, and then they just take over, and and they bill you by the hour, and it can cost you an absolute fortune. And I'm in a situation where I'm trying to claim health insurance, right, when I travel to America, and looks like I'm going to have to take the insurance company to court. And now I'm thinking, well, the amount it's going to cost to take these people to court compared to the amount that I'm asking. I'm not saying that that's the same as certification, but it's a similar thing where you're thinking about sunk costs, right? And so one thing that could maybe be something to think about is how can one mitigate those costs in some way? In other words, how can the certification process be streamlined, be something that is not so painful for these operators? Because I don't think it's a one-way street. I don't think it's just certify no matter what. I think maybe the certification can be made simpler and more cost-effective, and have a kind of a window in which it should reasonably be done, be completed.
Aware of the letter of concern that the MTS was drafting, that you had some sympathy for the position of trying to get a new carbon fiber hull certified or
There's a company in Rhode Island that's making pressure vessels, not for human occupancy, but for 6,000 meters, and they have it more or less worked out. And from what I've read and from talking to other people, that gentleman reached out to Stockton Rush and wanted to confer with him, and Stockton refused his advice or even opportunity of meeting with him.
Objection, what's the basis?
That wasn't really my question, sir. I was going to ask you why you felt the sympathy was it because you felt like a carbon fiber hull would take a long time to get certified correctly?
It would take a very long time.
Do you know how many years that would be, your time frame?
I would say it would be more of an effort than what the Navy did for getting acrylic windows up to, I mean, the book is that thick, and more money than Stockton had.
Are you familiar with international rules for submersibles?
No.
At this time, I'd like to go to OceanGate Council for any questions.
Sure, thank you. Before the dive, Mr. Stanley, that you did on the Titan, I believe we had the date of April 17th, 2019. Do you recall Mr. Rush describing that as a home-built sub to you before you came to dive on it?
I don't recall.
Okay. And which date, so your dive was on April 17th. Do you recall when you arrived and when you departed Bahamas for that?
I think I was there the better part of a week, but without searching flight records, I couldn't tell you exact dates.
Understood. And do you recall that between April 16th and April 18th, so including on the date of your dive, Mr. Nolan Thompson, a surveyor for Lloyd's Register, was present for the dive?
I don't recall meeting him.
Just give me 1 second. And the the version of the Titan submersible that you dove on April 17th, do you know if that was the carbon fiber hull that was used on the Titanic expeditions?
To
Don't
my
think it
knowledge, it was
was.
not.
No.
Thank you.
Sir, just a couple more follow-up questions. You mentioned that you dove on the Antipodes in Puget Sound.
Correct. Was
Was there any compensation for that dive?
No.
Why do you think Mr. Rush provided that dive to you?
Fellow enthusiasts
Why, sir?
that, we both had a big interest in submersibles, and I don't remember who else was in the sub, and I mean, they probably had some kind of other mission they were doing, and I just kind of went along with it, but I don't, it was probably more than 10 years ago.
Sir, do you remember it was like a scientific mission that you were on?
I don't remember us doing any science. I remember being about 50 feet underwater and thinking we must have been hundreds because it was already so dark.
Sir, Lieutenant Commander Williams has a question for you.
Lieutenant Steele, could you bring up Exhibit 052, the maintenance log, and scroll to page 9, please? If you could scroll into the May 29th.
Got a couple of post-its there. I think he's
According
getting ready
to
for his
the
closing.
maintenance log seen here it was discovered on May 29th that a crack was seen on inside of main pressure vessel at the 0900 clock position.
The important thing
Lieutenant Steele, can you now
to,
bring back up exhibit
sorry, just a second. The important thing to note, I'll put it back on full screen, is this crack that's noted, it's over there, it's just under the insert there. That's 29th of May. Crack seen on inside of main pressure vessel at 9 o'clock position. So all of that those sounds that he was talking about wasn't just anxiety. It was experience talking there. And if only Stockton had listened to what Karl was trying to convince him about. Have a look at this this point over here.
085, which is the email conversation, and
Damn
scroll
it.
to page 5,
Did you guys see it?
which is the email conversation.
Stop.
Big interest in submersibles, and I don't remember who else was in the sub, and I mean, they probably had some kind of other mission they were doing, and I just kind of went along with it, but I don't.
Which is the email conversation.
Oh, I keep missing it. So there it is over there. 5th 29, crack seen on inside of main pressure vessel at 9 o'clock position. Not good.
Which is the email conversation.
There was actually another
to
reference. I'm not going to
page
go back to it. Inspected hole crack that was lower down.
Looking at the end of the second page, and actually, could you scroll up first just a little bit so we can see the date? Mr. Stanley, we can see that it is on June 2nd that Stockton Rush sent this email to you. At the end of the second paragraph, it says, whether a localized acoustic activity we all heard is critical or merely characteristic is yet to be determined. I just wanted to confirm that there was no other communication between you and Stockton besides this email that occurred in June 2019. or this email, these email chains.
Not that I can recall.
And so just to confirm, he never told you about the crack of the hull at this time.
I found out about the crack from Wired magazine.
Thank you.
She
That's all I
didn't tell him. He withheld that.
Are there any other questions?
Can I ask
For
just
Mr.
a
Stanley?
quick follow-up?
Yes.
Mr. Stanley, do you know whether Mr. Rush knew of the crack when that email was sent? I assume not, since you learned from the Wired
Yeah,
article,
no.
but I just wanted to confirm.
How would I know that?
Right, thank you.
So it would be possible that he was not informed.
I
in your
find that
opinion.
highly unlikely.
Understand. At this time, are there any further questions for Mr. Stanley? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Stanley, is there anything that we haven't asked you that you think would be valuable for the board to consider?
Yes. And I realize what I'm going to say kind of is, I expect objections from OceanGate's counsel, and I would wish that you would indulge me a few minutes to lay out what I think about this, seeing that OceanGate came very, very close to killing me and has had a severe impact on my business as well as an entire industry. And I think I could at least have a few minutes to spell out why I think this all happened and how it happened, because I've spent a great deal of time trying to figure that out and also researching it. And there's a lot of information online about Stockton and his family. And I
Sir-
think I have a pretty good theory about how this all connects.
Well, sir, I don't want to dig into information you may have seen on social media or online.
I mean, I'm talking about his father's obituary, things like that.
I'd rather not go into his, father's obituary. Can you condense this into a theory that you have?
So the definition of an accident is something that happened unexpectedly and by sheer chance. There was nothing unexpected about this. This was expected by everybody that had access to a little bit of information. And I think that if it wasn't an accident, it then has to be some degree of crime. And if it's a crime, I think to truly understand it, you need to understand the criminal's motive. And I think the entire reason this whole operation started was Stockton had a desire to leave his mark on history. He was living in the shadow of 250 years of historically significant figures. And his father was extremely well accomplished Marine, big game hunter, president-elect of Bohemian Club. And the Bohemian Club plays a central role to this incident because Stockton was allowed in, but only to provide entertainment. And his ego, he needed something to go.
Sir, I just want to stop you there
Yeah.
because I feel like this is information that you've gleaned that's outside the scope of my investigation. So
It's central to understanding why.
can you limit to your theory? You believe Stockton Rush was trying to make his mark in history? Is that the basis
Exactly.
of this?
I mean, he had enough money to charter a sub and see the sub. He actually went on record in an interview and saying that the first trip to the Titanic, he didn't even bother looking out the window. This wasn't, and I don't think it was about making money the way that Guillermo said. Also, that entire business plan is completely bonkers. The industry of oil and gas and military completely moved to ROVs like the one that you released the footage retrieving the wreckage. They don't need 5-man vehicles for those kind of applications. They've got this already figured out with remotely operated vehicles. Stockton's entire business plan made 0 sense. But I think these wealthy individuals probably from the Bohemian Club, probably on his board of directors, threw money at him, and he was painted into a corner. And I think lowering that thing on a fishing line, he was looking for an out. He probably hoped the fishing line broke. Why would you not even use a decent rope? And he, how do you tell all made 0 sense? But I think these wealthy individuals, probably from the Bohemian Club, probably on his board of directors, threw money at him, and he was painted into a corner. And I think lowering that thing on a fishing line, he was looking for an out. He probably hoped the fishing line broke. Why would you not even use a decent rope? And he, how do you tell all these people that invested? Guillermo gave me a number of $100 million of investment. How do you tell people their $100 million is gone and your business plan was a terrible idea and isn't working out? And I think that's why he kept diving, and he knew that eventually it was going to end like this, and he wasn't going to be held accountable, but he was going to be the most famous of all his famous relatives.
Thank you, sir. At this time, Mr. Stanley, you are released as a witness at this Marine Board investigation. Thank you for your assistance and cooperation with this investigation. If we need further information from you, we will contact you directly. And if you need further information from this board, you can contact our recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele. At this time, the hearing will adjourn for the day and reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Sorry, I see I'm muted. Yeah, I just muted myself because there's someone here complaining about how loud the mic is, or whatever. But yeah, just to come back to Pirate Commander saying lowering it on a fishing line. When I heard that, I was like, I cannot believe, does this guy really have a death wish? Because that was a 10-pound, 10-pound fishing line. If that snaps, well, it's got you're a goner, right? And why wouldn't you? I mean, it's your own life, your own safety. You know, like you hanging over the abyss on a fishing line. Why wouldn't you take a bit more precaution than that? Maybe a cable. But one does get a sense that Stockton was moving in a direction where he felt there was a lot of expectation on him, and he felt like he didn't have any choice. Of course, you do have a choice. You know, if you can let go of hubris and ego and what others think of you. And clearly was quite coming from the background that he did, I guess it's understandable. And I think that is something that is important. I know in a legal proceeding, it's not easy to deal with, but it is something that is often left out, is the why and the who. Who is this person we're dealing with? I hope that they show some interviews with Stockton, and I don't know whether it's the purview of this investigation to interview a psychologist, but it would be interesting if they did. Based on what he says in interviews, there's so much hubris, is actually incredible. But you kind of get the sense, I don't agree with it, but I'm not Stockton, that he felt he didn't have any choice, right? He felt he didn't have any choice. He was going down a road where it was kind of make or break. And you heard something about that he wanted to be Captain Kirk. He ended up being, who's a really infamous captain? Who's the captain? Captain Nemo, was he well respected? But yeah, he certainly did become notorious. I wouldn't say that he ever became famous. One thing that he can claim some fame is that he did manage to dive to the Titanic in a carbon fiber submersible. You can say whatever you want about that. That is something that he did. I personally think it's foolhardy and he was trying to save money, but just in terms of that goal, he succeeded for all intents and purposes. And I think one area that is easy to forget about is that took courage. Going down in a craft by yourself took courage. What the part that I don't like is imposing all of that onto other people and the whole marketing bullshit that surrounded all of this. That's the part I really don't like. I don't like the denial and the sort of playing along with that so many other people did as well. If something like this happens, learn your lesson, realize your mistake. And it looks like there are some people that are incapable of that. What do you do with them? How do you get through to them? What happens if you can't get through to them? Right? Let's have a look at some of your latest comments. Just a quick thank you to the 2 super chats from this live stream, Fractured Fairy Tales and Suleku. Thanks very much for that. Just a couple of final comments. Lucy Milan says something there. Lisa Cube says, I wonder how much his life is insured for. I mean, one does wonder, did he have a death wish? And also, did PH Nargila have a death wish? Because people asked him, and he said something like, well, I'm 70 years old, well, 77 or something. And I think isn't he a widower? Wasn't he a widower? And you kind of got the feeling that he was doing what he loved and he didn't really care, kind of thing. But the problem is, what about other people? What about that 19-year-old that was on the craft? Thanks a lot, Lucy. Keith says, thanks a lot for that. Yeah, Suleiman's, that's right. She said that he was afraid that the kid was no explorer. And that the kid didn't want to disappoint his father. Wasn't it near Father's Day as well? It was either on Father's Day or just very close to it. Josh says, okay. Yeah, that's definitely been what has fascinated me, is the psychologies, because it's quite unusual and it's also quite, we're dealing with a rich, educated, charming, intelligent guy who makes a really stupid mistake, actually a series of stupid mistakes, and he sucks a lot of people into his fairy tale. And that's why I've said this before. Even the smartest people have fairy tales. Beware of that. Beware that someone's intelligence may be addled by their own fairy tale. I wonder whether that's not happening to some extent with Elon Musk. He's a very intelligent guy, but is he being caught up in his own fairy tale? Chris KV, thanks very much for that. I'm going to go off momentarily, very soon. Yeah, that's true. He was a widower. You kind of get the idea. It's almost like climbing Everest. We are all here to have an adventure, and if things go wrong, that's okay. Are you really appreciating that if things go wrong, you could die, right? And again, in the case of the 19-year-old that lost his life, he's trusting really in the intelligence, critical thinking of other people. And was he right to do so? So, yeah. Okay, thanks, guys. Erin says, hopefully you'll stream more of these hearings. Who's up tomorrow? It depends on how good they are. Let's just have a look at the witness list for tomorrow. Witness list for Titan for day 7. Let's have a quick look. Day 7 is the 25th. I might want to hear his testimony. So let's just see exactly who that is. Mr. Bart Kemper, OceanGate. He's a forensic engineer. Well, he should be really, really interesting. So yeah, I'll try and bring that to you guys tomorrow. So we'll see you guys for that. Bart Kemper at 2:45 p.m. plus minus. Forensic engineer, that should really be quite interesting. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for joining me. Hope you guys are doing well. Keith says, I'll watch it if you do it. Okay, cool. Take care, guys. See you guys next time.